talking about spellers, right? Well, I'm going to be partial to it because I got a special needs daughter. And though she's not nonverbal, when we adopted her, she was. And they told us she'd never speak. And I think my wife needed a daughter as bad as the daughter needed a mom. And so my wife spent so much time in therapies and everything else. They told us she'd never walk or talk. She does
Wow.
both.
Wow.
And you know, she's a blessing from God beyond measure. And you know, like even now we joke like, you know, we prayed for this. You know, like when she's popping off like a teenager. You know, now she's globally delayed. She has autism and she's she's got in cerebral palsy, so she's got some things working against her. But her life is way different than they anticipated it to be, and that changed me.
Mhm.
It you celebrate things that most people take for granted, and you know, you talking about like that perspective of you know framing that up from that perspective of the like, how did that change you? Like,
Well, I mean, it's what I was saying where I had to there. I mean, it's such a long process. It took us 3 years to develop. So it was on, you know, a lot of documentary filmmaking. People, any of my film homies laugh at this, but it really does take time. And I feel so bad. Like even if it's a documentary short, I mean, it took us 2 years to do the James Beard thing. It was only like 18 minutes long. It's not that much. Spellers is an hour and 25 minutes. So
yeah,
that one had some legs, or an hour and 20, 21 or two. I think that's where I felt it the most was in the edit bay. Those were dark days for me. I mean, I don't think I've ever, besides, and this happened a little bit after moving. When I was moving out of LA, those were definitely the darkest days for me. I definitely felt like, you know, God had to open up a big door for me to like start climbing my way out of mental health issues and all that stuff, just from being in a startup situation that was not healthy for me. And I think I was just in the wrong role, honestly.
right.
But you know, similar feeling was working on the project. And when I actually dug deep into the project, not just, there's a huge difference in editing. Like you can surface dwell for a while and get familiar. That's a huge part of it. Getting familiar is massive with your footage and knowing what generally the stories are, right? We followed probably 12, 13 kids. So, I mean, it's a lot of stories, and which stories are not valid. Like you can't say any of the stories are not valid for the longer story, but how do you cherry pick pieces of it? And it was really hard. And the way that we figured out how to do it, and I pitched this to the director, was I watched he had taken some of the footage back and was goofing around with it. And he unintentionally just showed me one section of some footage raw that we watched that he had just shot. He was just giving it to me, and I was out in LA, and it felt different to me because it was sitting watching the kid communicate, and was one of the first times this kid had ever communicated, and it was on camera, and it was incredible. The mom's, you know, obviously losing her mind, crying and all this. It's incredible. But I noticed the pacing was really different. And normally we're trying to cut, chop things away and not let people just sit with the moment. But that showed me that you could. And for me as an editor, I felt really connected to those kids because I had to know I knew pretty much everything they said throughout the entire, you know, I don't know how many hundreds of hours of footage we had, but what are the best bites from these kids that are them saying? And he said something like, or not him, but one of the other kids said, you know, I've been locked in a silent cage my whole life. This is the first time I've ever been able to express myself. I didn't know what I was going to do, you know, and they're 15, 16 years old. So when you're hearing that all the time, this is where it becomes impact documentary work. It's not just a documentary. Then it becomes, it's not really even a cause. This is just like boots on the ground. This is what's happening for these kids. I don't know, man. I'm talking around it, but it was dark for me. But then once I got to know the kids and see their resilience, I mean, all I'm doing is pushing buttons to really make them, you know, be seen. And they
Yep.
were seen from that. And they were really, we had a couple kids that were able to take that method of communication, which was and still is like banned in a lot of places, which doesn't make any sense to me in the schools. But they were able to take that to Congress and got a couple states to actually, you know, reform and let them use it in classrooms. And because otherwise it's a
What do you
special
think?
needs room,
What do
you
you
know?
think they would ban it?
I
Like,
don't know. I don't know.
I
It's really hard to not get political about it, but it doesn't make any sense to me.
well, I live this world, and
Yeah.
I've said in these meetings, and I've seen these things, and from my perspective, I have it's bias.
Yeah, it is bias.
And I think when you're inside of it, you can't not be biased. And the problem is you can't be unbiased to it as an
Mhm.
outsider when it's
Mhm.
talking about someone's way of life. And my daughter, like it would take you a minute to realize she's got special needs.
Mhm.
If you just saw her, you would just be like, okay, it would depend on what she was doing, but like you wouldn't just immediately um think anything.
Right.
She
Right.
you pulled up at my house. I got 7 kids at home. They would be running in the yard and riding bikes and doing things, and you would just be like, "Oh, look at the kids." And like, but if you spend a minute with her doing anything that should be a normal function, you'd very quickly be like, "What's going on here?" And I remember when we put her in school, they were like, "Oh, she'll do great. We'll just put her in the regular track and well, and I was like, no, that is not like, no. And we had to fight because there's like this outside, unbiased group that
Mhm.
wants to say, no, no, you can't discriminate and do these, solo classrooms and stuff like that. Like they need to just be integrated into the whole thing. And I'm like, that's not what's best for them. That makes you feel some kind of way. You feel like you're championing a cause. You're destroying an opportunity for her. She's not going to learn the same way. She can't behave the same way. And we figured it out in kindergarten. She went to a normal pre-K, and literally like the third day, the teacher's like, "This is going on. This is going on," and we're like, duh,"
Yeah, what do you expect? Yeah.
It was disheartening because we were
Mhm.
like, as a parent, you really want your kid to have the best version of life as well,
Mhm.
and then you feel bad because there's a stigma to providing the resources for them because it's self-containment and all these
Right.
things, and I'm like, but that's what we want,
Yeah.
and they're trying to dismantle it, and like, so to hear that, it's like, it
Yeah,
it
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 gets you, right?
it char yeah, it hit something deep inside of me because I know the people making those decisions don't know what they're talking about, and
Well, and that's where like from all of our footage and basically after the Phoenix Film Festival win, we had some connections with some networks and got a whole series funded after, which we just finished.
that's
Um
awesome.
and it's basically spin-offs of some of these themes. One of them's school system. So what we challenged in that was, you know, the systematic approach from a lot of schools that are, you know, just government run, that probably are just following the X's and O's of what they have to do and not being as adaptive, because you have the challenge when you have anybody that's on the spectrum, there is going to be some adaptation. That's how they live their life. They're trying to figure out how to even process. I've spent so much time with these kids now. I know them really well. Like, these are full functioning, amazing individuals that are not given a voice.